307 million views. In less than 2 months. That is what Google claimed for its documentary about Google, a film about its own AI lab, released on its own platform, with its own CEO promoting it. For context, 307 million views would make it one of the most watched documentaries in YouTube history. More than most Hollywood releases. More than most viral moments. More than almost anything that wasn't a music video or a Super Bowl clip. A researcher named Mike Todasco noticed something. He went to the video. He checked the comment count. He checked the like ratio. He checked engagement metrics that YouTube makes publicly visible. The numbers didn't add up. Not a little. A lot. This is a story about a number. About who published it, why they needed it to be big, and what happens in an industry where the companies that build AI also control the data that proves how much people trust it. When the data agrees with the press release, we call it success. When someone checks, we call it a question. Most of the time, nobody checks. The documentary is called The Thinking Game. It's 84 minutes long. It premiered at the 2024 Tribeca Festival. It traces Hasabi's from his childhood as a chess prodigy in London, through his academic career in neuroscience, to co-founding DeepMind, which was acquired by Google in 2014 for roughly $500 million. The film culminates with AlphaFold, DeepMind's AI system that predicted the structures of proteins, solving a problem that had confounded biologists for 50 years. In 2024, Hasabi shared the Nobel Prize in Chemistry for this work. It is, by any reasonable measure, an extraordinary story. Google made it. Google distributed it, for free, on YouTube, which Google also owns. Google's CEO, Sundar Pichai, promoted it. Demis Hassabis tweeted about the view counts himself. The narrative the numbers were meant to tell was clear. Millions of people wanted to understand AI, and Google had given them the definitive account of what AI had accomplished. 307 million of them. In 2 months. Mike Todasco, a visiting fellow at the James Silberad Brown Center for Artificial Intelligence at San Diego State University, had a different reaction. He started putting the number in context. 307 million views in 2 months would make The Thinking Game the 7th most watched YouTube video globally for December 2025. That ranking was tracked by Playboard, a YouTube analytics service. This placed an 84-minute documentary about protein folding and AI research ahead of nearly every music video, viral clip, and major entertainment release on the platform. For comparison, Mariah Carey's All I Want for Christmas Is You, one of the most reliably viewed videos in YouTube history, received roughly 3 times fewer views during the same December period. For further comparison, K-pop Demon Hunters, the most talked about streaming film of 2025, had accumulated 500 million views on Netflix across its entire release cycle. The Thinking Game was approaching that number, on YouTube alone, without a theatrical release, significant press coverage, or cultural conversation. Todasco went to Google Trends. If 300 million people had watched something in less than 2 months, search interest would reflect that. He compared search traffic for The Thinking Game against major films, viral moments, even relatively obscure box office releases. The Thinking Game didn't register. He compared it to AlphaGo, DeepMind's previous documentary, also released free on YouTube, also widely discussed in technology circles. AlphaGo had 37 million views accumulated over 5 years. It had significantly more comments and likes than The Thinking Game, despite having 1/8 of the stated view count. The ratio didn't add up. The Thinking Game had 307 million views. And 3,955 comments. Engagement metrics are imperfect, but they are not meaningless. Every major content category on YouTube maintains a consistent relationship between views, likes, comments, and shares. The ratios vary by content type. A music video will have more comments per view than a documentary. A controversial news clip will generate more engagement per view than a cooking tutorial, but within a category, the patterns are stable. An 84-minute documentary attracting 307 million genuine views in 2 months would produce tens of thousands of comments. It would appear in recommendations for everyone who watched AI-adjacent content. It would generate articles, video responses, podcast references. It would be everywhere that topics go when they reach that audience size. It wasn't. Todasco ran the numbers one more way. He used Gemini, Google's own AI, to evaluate the statistics. He fed Gemini the view count, the comment count, the like count, and the engagement patterns. He asked it to assess whether the numbers were consistent with genuine viewership. Gemini, Google's own model, running on Google's own infrastructure, returned an assessment that described the view-to-engagement ratio as anomalous. The pattern was inconsistent with how organic viewership behaves on the platform. The irony was precise. Google's AI, used to analyze Google's documentary, distributed on Google's platform, questioned Google's numbers. What the analysis suggested, though Todasco was careful to say he wasn't certain, was that the view count included automated views. Bots. Traffic from servers, not from people. Possibly from YouTube's own infrastructure, which autoplays videos in certain contexts. Possibly from Google's own promotional systems, which might autoplay the documentary in ad slots or preview windows. Possibly from third-party sources. View count inflation on YouTube has been documented for years. Bot traffic, automated views from networks of servers or compromised devices, can be purchased. Even without malicious intent, YouTube's own autoplay system can inflate counts by playing videos without human engagement. The platform's view count is not a perfect measure of human attention. YouTube itself acknowledges this. It periodically audits and removes fraudulent views from channels that purchase them. The difference, in those cases, is that the channel owner bought the views. In this case, the question was whether the platform itself was generating traffic for content owned by its parent company. That is a different kind of conflict of interest, and a harder one to detect from outside the system. Google did not respond to the analysis. The Wall Street Journal and other outlets that had cited the 300 million view figure did not issue corrections. Demis Hassabis's tweets remain posted. Before going further, it's worth being precise about what Todasco's analysis did and didn't show. He did not prove that Google inflated the view count deliberately. He did not prove that the views were fake. What he showed was that the engagement metrics, comments, likes, shares, were wildly inconsistent with what organic viewership at that scale produces. He showed that search traffic, which reliably spikes when something is watched by hundreds of millions of people, didn't spike for the thinking game. He showed that YouTube's own comparative analytics, when applied to similar content, produced a ratio that made no sense. That could mean deliberate inflation. It could mean YouTube's autoplay system was running the documentary in ad slots or promotional placements, generating views that were never watched. It could mean something else entirely. Without access to Google's internal data, which Google controls, there is no way to determine which explanation is correct. And that is precisely the point. What makes the thinking game case interesting is not what it proves nothing definitively, but what it reveals about how the AI industry measures itself. The AI industry runs on metrics. Model benchmarks, user counts, compute capacity, training data scale. These numbers are how the industry tells its story. They appear in press releases and Wall Street Journal articles and congressional testimony. They are the basis on which companies attract capital, shape policy, and influence what we believe is happening. When those numbers are produced by the companies being measured, on infrastructure those companies control, with verification that those companies determine, something important becomes invisible. Not the story. The story is still there. AlphaFold really did predict protein structures that had stumped biologists for 50 years. Demis Hassabis really did win a Nobel Prize. The science behind the thinking game is genuine and significant. But 307 million people watching an 84-minute documentary about protein folding in 2 months, that is a very specific claim. And the only entity in a position to verify it is the same entity that made it. The pattern Todasco identified is not unique to this documentary. It is a structural feature of how the AI industry communicates. Companies publish benchmark results on tests they designed. They announce user counts defined by metrics they chose. They release research showing their models' capabilities in formats they control. The press covers the announcements. The numbers become the record. Every industry does this to some degree. What makes AI different is the scale of the claims and the speed at which they are accepted. A movie studio claiming 307 million viewers would be asked immediately for third-party verification. A technology company claiming the same number on its own platform, for its own content, received that number as a credible figure in major publications. The technology is real. The achievements are real. The Nobel Prize is not in dispute. But the view count? The view count was 307 million. And 3,955 comments. The documentary is still on YouTube. The view count keeps climbing. The AI industry is still announcing its own results, in its own formats, on its own platforms. Google owns YouTube. Google made the thinking game. Google's CEO promoted it. Demis Hassabis shared the view counts on social media. Google's own AI assessed the engagement metrics and found them anomalous. The press reported the 300 million figure. Nobody checked whether it was real before publishing it. The number was from Google. Google is credible. The number became the record. That is how AI metrics work in 2025. The companies that build the technology also define how it is measured. They run the benchmarks. They count the users. They report the results. Independent verification, the kind that would require access to platform-level data that companies do not share, is essentially unavailable. This doesn't mean the numbers are all wrong. Most of the major claims about AI capabilities are broadly accurate. The Nobel Prize was real. AlphaFold worked. The models are genuinely powerful in documented ways. But somewhere in the space between genuine achievement and the public narrative built around it, there is a view count that doesn't match the comments. There is a number that no one outside Google can verify. There is a documentary about artificial intelligence whose claimed viewership was, itself, questioned by artificial intelligence. There's a second dimension to this story that Todasco's analysis touched on but couldn't fully address: the incentive structure. Google had a clear interest in the documentary performing well. The thinking game was not just a film, it was a narrative about what Google DeepMind had built, released at a moment when Google was competing aggressively with OpenAI, Anthropic, and Meta for the title of the leading AI company in the world. A documentary that 300 million people watched was a proof point in that competition. It said, "The public is interested in what we have done. The public is watching." 300 million views is a public mandate argument. It is the kind of number that gets cited in congressional hearings when legislators ask how important AI is to ordinary people. It is the kind of number that justifies continued investment, continued regulatory deference, continued trust in the company's judgment about where technology should go. If that number is real, it means something. If it isn't, it was used to mean something it didn't. When the data agrees with the press release, we call it success. When a researcher checks the numbers, we call it a question. Most of the time, in the AI industry in 2025, nobody is checking. The number gets published. The story gets told. The view count keeps climbing. That is how metrics become narratives. A number is released. It is cited. It travels. It becomes the record. If the company that owns the platform, makes the content, and controls the data announces the results, and no one with independent access is checking, how would you know the difference between a number that's real and one that isn't? If you think more people need to hear this story, share it. And subscribe, because this isn't the last time AI changes someone's life.